Hello, everyone. As you're logging in, we're just getting ready. Let a few other people get logged in, and then we will get started. But you could use the chat area and introduce yourself and tell us where you're logging in from. I think we should just get started, and as people join in, they can pick it up, and we will also post the recording. So if someone's missed the beginning, they can watch it. Looks like we've got quite a global group, and welcome to everyone. We're really pleased to have you here with us. Um, do you want to advance the slides? So, what we'd like to do today, after we do some introductions, we're going to um, kind of talk about some of the points that we've been writing about in Eleanor's blog, my blog, and our shared blog through this academic writing month. Do you want to just go to the next slide? And then we will have time for questions and answers. So I hope that you'll think about both your questions and also comments and thoughts about some of the things we're sharing. So Eleanor, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Eleanor Pritchard. I'm a researcher developer at the University of Oxford in Social Sciences, which means I look after the training and development programme for our 1,600 PhD students and 500 fixed-term researchers. I write the Steady Letter, which until yesterday, breaking news, was called PhD Progress Weekly, and I'm an academic writing mentor. I co-host the Reimagine Research newsletter with Janet, and I'm a fellow of the Higher Education Academy, which is the higher education teaching accreditation in the UK. So for all of these reasons, gives me an enormous interest in thinking about academic writing and how we support researchers with that and what they can do with it. So that's me. Thank you, Janet.
Yes, and so I call myself a free range scholar because free range as in I'm not associated with any particular institution at this time after having many years as a professor and dissertation supervisor. I'm a methodologist, which means it's kind of, I think of it as like meta research. I'm interested in how we do research. And of course, then that ties into the ways that we share our research. My particular interest has been around using technology tools, communications technology tools in collecting data and sharing the findings. So both of us share a real passion for research and a belief in the value of empirical research in today's world, and that kind of drives our decision to make time to do this kind of effort that we are today. And we're very happy that you're here with us. Do you want to advance the? So over the course of this month, in our three sister blogs, these are some of the kinds of topics that we've been focusing on. And so what we would like to do today is kind of look at how, the interrelationship between these different dimensions, with, starting with, building your confidence and your, um, willingness, to kind of put your work out there, and then looking at some of the ways that we share our research in formal and informal ways. So, why don't you advance the slide, and then Eleanor, tell us a little bit about what you were writing to encourage people to
Yeah.
have confidence in their own work.
Yeah, so we've been thinking on PhD Progress Weekly, now the steady, we've been thinking about building a sort of writing identity at times, particularly at times where the pressure for writing is really intense, and it becomes very much a sort of the sense of self-identity becomes very much bound up about the writing. So through the series of pieces I've run this month, we've been thinking about how to support people in recognizing that your research identity exists beyond institutional walls. It's about values that you won't compromise, skills you've genuinely developed, and the problems you're compelled to solve rather than your current student or contract status. And we've been thinking a lot about how that often involves writing before knowing, which is really uncomfortable given the backgrounds that most people come to PhD writing from, whether that be a sort of straight through academic track and you've come from a taught master's program, or whether they've come back into academia from a professional background. That panicky feeling when you can't yet see the argument and how you write about it, that's not confusion. That's this cognitive state before clarity arrives, but it feels very alarming and very off-putting. So we think about that, also about the idea of when arguments dissolve, how you're working really hard on something and maybe you've been super immersed in it. And this is not just for theses, it's for any kind of academic writing, I believe, that you suddenly reach a point when you know it almost too well and the whole thing just suddenly feels really hollow. And it means that you're just trying to hold something too complex, too big, too nuanced in place at once. And it's a necessary element of scholarly work that actually this sort of conceptual complexity and structural complexity very often is inherent in scholarly work, and so something that we need to learn to sit with and to accommodate and find ways of working through. And then sort of moving into some of the writing I've done on the Reimagine Research blog this month. I've been thinking about being very careful about writing for audiences. So part of building confidence in your identity is knowing where you stand in relation to the people that you're talking to. So are they your examiners? Are they your peers? Are they practitioners that you want to use their work? So really thinking about audience and then choosing an appropriate register and amount of jargon. And then thinking in a more broader sense in terms of job applications, when you're applying for jobs, thinking about readership and what the signals are that your formatting and language and writing choices send out about who you are and how good a match you are for the post you're looking for. So in terms of both this researcher, the sort of straightforward scholarly writing, but then also in terms of building a comprehensive sense of researcher identity, those are the themes we've been exploring. Thank you. Shall I hand over to
and take the next slide
next
too.
one? Yeah. That sort of leads naturally into thinking about building confidence in your expertise, your work, and your message. So it's very easy, and I think the nature of conversations with supervisors often leads us to being quite reductive and think of our PhD work or our academic article work or our book proposal is a sort of sum total of the work we're doing, but there's so much more going on behind it and around it and in interplay with it. So we're thinking also about building confidence in your work and message, how your PhD work, or indeed any other piece of academic writing, it never feels done until submission. And sometimes not even then, to be honest. Sometimes it just reaches the point that it just has to be submitted. So letting go of the idea of clean endings and work that's ever truly finished in a way that feels resolved internally is something we've been exploring. We've been thinking about how real progress looks different and that you can move from thinking that you've wasted an afternoon or that you've spent days staring at the same thing and you've not got anywhere, and and then in inverted commas, suddenly things seem to click, but that's not suddenly clicking. That's the consequence or the sort of outcome of all of the percolating rather and mulling that's gone on behind the scenes. Um, Thinking about that complete crisis loss of judgment we all get when you just don't know whether what you've written is brilliant or absolute nonsense. And how common and shared an experience that is, and how then taking a break and walking away from it, whether that be job applications or straightforward academic writing, is often really the most useful thing you could do, and often the most difficult thing to do practically as well, because we're all working to deadlines with conflicting priorities. And I see there's a couple of people here today from writing retreats I've run, and I know from them that lives are complicated and busy, and often just taking time to step away from it is the last thing we're practically in a position to do. So those have been on the academic writing front, and particularly aimed at PhD students, but with wider relevance.
I think it does have a wider relevance because
Yeah.
this really applies, beyond student life when we have any really significant project,
Yeah.
to um, have confidence that what we have to say has value
Mm.
to the world. And so, a couple of the little dots we're connecting here that I wanted to also
Mm.
flag is that we have both, maybe seems like kind of a balance between, on one side, finding our scholarly voice. What is, what does, what does it sound like when Janet is writing versus when Eleanor is writing in terms of the ways that we frame things, the ways that we present things, but that fits within the parameters of the norms of scholarly writing. But then at the same time, we need to know how to explain these complex issues in plain language.
Yeah.
So we have both of those. And then the other dot that I've highlighted here about creating our public identity as someone who is trustworthy.
Mm.
So, how do we tie these kinds of things together? So let's go on to the next slide.
Yeah, I was just going to say that in terms of, I'd like to hope we get time to come back to voice a bit later, because I think that's so
Mhm.
crucial, because you said, what does Eleanor sound like versus what does Janet sound like? Um, and I just want to sort of pin the idea that we also have multiple voices for different contexts. So what Janet sounds like writing a
Right.
book is not the same thing that Janet sounds like maybe writing a blog article or making an application for funding for something. So it can be quite daunting to realize after spending all this time honing an academic voice that we need actually to have almost like a repertoire of voices for different
Right.
contexts, can't we? Yeah, I
Right.
think
I think that is one of the kind of underlying dot connections of
yeah.
that we're talking about at this time, because it's just not enough to do just one and not the other. We need the balance of both. So we're in our writing, we're using the term scholar versus the term researcher or the term academic intentionally, because you know um, underlying our Reimagine Research shared work is the thought of trying to help people move forward in their careers, to advance, to begin your career, to advance your career, to move through career change, and then ultimately to retire at the in your later years. But whatever your job position is, you're still a scholar. A scholar is who we are. Research is what we do, or teaching is what we do, mentoring, that's what we do. That's a part of our action. But our identity as a scholar is something that no one can give us or take away. You know, it, and I think this is really important to affirm, especially when we're in transition, and especially either when we're at the beginning as students, where we're trying to figure out where are we going to fit in the world, and then as our career evolves, to say, this is who I am. I'm going to I'm going to use that scholarly ability as a researcher, as a person who is curious and wants to learn and understand and share what I know, that those are characteristics that we can take with us, but we can stand with that. So if you're someone who is, in between, and someone asks you, well, what are you doing right now, Eleanor? Instead of if she were in between jobs or job searching, instead of going like, oh, I've sent out 20 resumes and I've been working on my Vita and I'm doing all these things, but I'm not getting anywhere. Instead to say, well, I'm I'm a scholar in this field, and this is what I'm reading, this is what I'm learning. That gives you something that you can stand on as you're trying to build that trustworthy identity in the world, and to find your place where you can make your mark as a scholar. So let's go on to
Well,
the next slide.
yeah, just before we do, I was
Yes,
just gonna add to that if I may, two things. First of
yes.
all, it's a truth universally acknowledged among people that work with doctoral researchers in my institution, that there is a phenomenon which is called various things, sort of described in various ways, but essentially it's the slowdown. That as people come closer to the finish line, they seem to slow down, and usually when sort of unpicked with supportive supervisors, it is an underpinning anxiety about finishing, because who am I if I'm not doing this thing that I've been doing for 4 years and I'm not quite sure what's coming yet. So I think your sort of suggestion about really sort of foregrounding that ongoing scholarly identity is so important and so valuable, whatever life or career stage we're at. And if anybody is in a position to and doesn't mind sharing, it'd be really lovely if you could just drop in the chat where you're up to in your journey. And if you're in a transition or thinking or approaching a transition, it'd be really interesting to hear what that is, because it might be that we can be a bit more specific if we have a sense of where you're up to. And the last thing, just before we move on, is I wanted to share a quote from I've done many interviews with students over the last decade, and about exactly this. And it's from a student called Amira, who is a mature student finishing a PhD. And she said, the most disorientating realization was that my scholarly identity exists separate from my institutional affiliation. For years, I've introduced myself as, quote, a PhD student at X university, but now I'm preparing to be just me, a researcher without the institutional wrapper. It's both terrifying and strangely liberating. I think
Right.
that's a feeling certainly that I remember from big points of transition in my life, and I can see from your nodding, Janet, that it
Yeah.
feels familiar to you too.
Yes. Yes, definitely.
Okay. So one of the big sort of connecting themes or sets of dots we've been connecting have been around managing the process and completing the project, whatever the project is, be it a piece of writing or career stage or phase of transition. And I think that one of the certainly something that's come up across all three blogs in different ways is the idea of, in all of these processes that we're managing, we're trying to take something that's really 3D and sort of whole, and we're trying to flatten it into a 2D format almost to pass through some kind of gateway, right? So whether that's thesis writing or trying to take all your empirical data or your enormous archive work that you've done, and you're trying to get it into this very set piece format for your thesis, or maybe it's a job description and you've got your rich and complex, beautiful life that you've lived to date, and you're trying to hold it against the job requirements and demonstrate how it matches perfectly. But this can be a very intimidating and a very overwhelming experience, because it's necessarily leaving things out. It's moving things around the edges, and sort of coming to terms with that is sort of an implicit thread in the things that I've written this month about thesis writing and other kinds of academic writing, but also about doing job applications as well. And the constant throughout that is around cultivating your voice, and with your voice cultivation, it's a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. Your voice create cultivation both builds confidence and creates confidence. So when you know you're sounding like yourself, rather than looking at something you've produced and feeling like it's just appeared on the page without any connection to you, that is really the most empowering confidence builder to help you manage and finish any process. Um, Janet, was there anything you wanted to add
Yeah,
to that?
so I think, part of the thing here too is that, as we're realizing at this time in the world, it's a huge time. There's a lot of upheaval in the world of research and academic life.
Mm.
And being able to manage when you're in an in-between stage, whether that is coming to the end of a degree program, or having your position eliminated or your research funding eliminated, and now you've got to figure out what the heck to do. I mean, I had the situation myself. My, was years ago at this point, but my faculty position was just eliminated. They were reorganized, and it's like, sorry, your position's gone. So then you don't have, in any of those situations, you no longer have the parameters, the frameworks, the deadlines, and all of that helps you to manage your large projects. And it's up to you to do that. And so then how do you do that? And where do you find the support and encouragement to move forward? And that's, what some of the, to go to the next stage of this thought process. Where do we find that the encouragement as well as the help with the accountability to keep going? So let's go to the next slide.
Yeah, just to add there before we do move on, I'm seeing a lot of resonance in the chat for and recognition of the difficulty of finishing, and how recognition of that sort of slowdown that I described. And Lisa's quite right. It's not only the very end of the thesis, it also happens at the major milestones and chapter submissions within it. So
Mhm.
when that happens, and it will happen, just know that you are just displaying perfectly normal doctoral student behavior, and that's fine. I think it's what we're sort of moving towards thinking about now, Janet's going to talk about, is how that can be vastly helped by engaging in community. And one of the challenges is when we're all work is so isolated for many people, it can be hard to sort of keep going on the long-term work when you're feeling very isolated, which I think leads us neatly onto the next slide.
So one of the things that I've been thinking about, from a variety of angles, is the importance of what I'm calling the virtual third place. So, we have, if you are familiar or have heard of the concept of the third place, that sociologists have talked about the importance of having that, in sort of outside of the academic writing context, that you have your workplace, you have home, but then where's the other place? Where's the other place where you meet people, you meet people who are not in your work life, and they're not your family. They're, other people in the community, and that help to reduce your sense of isolation, allow you to feel engaged, and to find commonality with people around a variety of interests that you may have. So how does this idea fit with what the things we're talking about here? Well, we have, the kind of writing that we're doing, for the scholarly writing that we're doing, that may be the articles we need to publish, books, chapters, monographs, etc. there's a particular format we need to follow. There's a particular set of protocols. There's the stages of peer review, etc., that go along with that. And then we have other kinds of writing that, when you're a student, you're doing things as assignments. We can just broadly say assignments, maybe dissertation. It's other things that are required for you to do. And when we're in professional life, we also have things that are, it wasn't our idea to do this, but it's something that we've got to do. Well, what else do we do to find our people that we can collaborate with, to find our community, and to get our work, out there while we're in the progress of completing these other more formal pieces. And so, here, I think that this idea of the third place, looking for the, some, and making this a part of your priority to find that in your life. And so I'm gonna just walk through some examples here. You go to the next one. So thinking about, and I'm using the term blog loosely. Here, could be a blog. We're writing on Substack. If you subscribe to our Substack newsletters, we will send in a follow-up to the webinar along with the recording, just a kind of index of the articles that refer to the things we're talking about here today. With Substack, it's a kind of a hybrid where we have a blog and a newsletter. There are other kinds of blogs, newsletters, etc., or video blogs. I'm just using the term blog as a kind of umbrella term here. But here, suggesting that, in this kind of third space, what might we try to do? We can't do everything, so we need to choose. So one thing we might be trying to do is to share our process and our findings, our work in progress, the experience of doing research, the skills building around doing research with other scholars. Or we might be, trying to contribute to the conversation in our broader field with the people who are professionals, practitioners, policymakers, who can use what we've learned to actually make a difference in the world. Or perhaps we are trying to inform a general audience, and the ways that we're going to communicate and the topics that we're going to discuss will vary depending on which of those or what combination of those we might want to reach.
Yeah, I would say, if it's all right, I'd like just to give a couple of examples of different Substack newsletters that I'm aware of that people who've come from academic backgrounds write, and how they've thought about the new readers that they want to connect with and why. Because I think it's really important to be very intentional about any sort of new strand of work, because time is a finite resource for all of us, and energy is finite. So you need to, I say you, I mean I, Janet, we all need to think really carefully about who we're aiming at and what for. So for example, my Substack newsletter, it started off as for doctoral students and early career researchers. So it was quite a good match. It was originally a match for my professional profile at Oxford, but over time I found it too hard to hold those two things together. So I focused it more on the doctoral students, because there are more commonalities in their experience than there are in postdoc experiences. So I've narrowed down my intended readership, and surprisingly, by narrowing it down, I actually have increased it significantly. So that's another thing. If you have something that's quite a niche interest for you, then don't be afraid to hold the niche, because people seem to prefer that than a general newsletter that tries to do all the things. I wanted to give two more examples of academics who both have, one has a lectureship, senior lectureship, and the other one a British Academy funded postdoc, who both have their own Substacks. The senior lecturer works in cyber law and encryption, and she uses her Substack to connect with practitioners and other academics who want to engage in conversations about current changes in international encryption and cybercrime law. But the process of peer review is so slow that although she does continue to write academic articles, she's having a very healthy and engaged and active second strand of conversation where she can almost do sort of almost immediate commentary on news and legislative developments. So that's an interesting sort of positioning. So she's writing for peers, but peers as practitioners, whether they be academics or lawyers.
Mm.
And the postdoc is working on internet-enabled devices in the home and continuing on a project which is going to have massive and useful policy application at the end. But the Substack that she started is intended to let her translate her findings into usable, actionable advice for families. So that's a completely different audience that she's writing for. And actually, what's sort of slowing the second one down is finding her voice of how she talks to non-academics. It's really there's a really rich and wide range of things that we can use these third spaces for. Yeah.
Right. So just to build on that, so focusing on the option of communicating with other scholars, including students. Here, why might we use informal writing to communicate with other scholars? I think you've given one good example.
Mm.
Part of it is that we're trying to make our place in the world as trustworthy scholars and experts in something, however, whatever that may be,
Mm.
and whatever state we may be in developing that expertise. But we have the chance to build relationships, to find others. Eleanor and I met on Substack, and here we are, working together, to find potential collaborative partners, to find people who share, that like little tiny interest that like when you talk with your friends, you can see their eyes go glazing over because they're like, oh, please don't tell me any more about this. And that certainly happens to me. So, but who are the people that have that interest? And how can you look for opportunities, whether it's to um, build your encouragement, to get feedback, I get emails from people or posts from messages from people. Would you take a look at this? Would you give me some feedback on this so that, we can get another set of eyes? Now, at the same time, while we are important for talking about cultivating your scholarly voice, and I have a series of posts about that we'll share in our follow-up, but I think the idea of being able to explain complex concepts is very important for two reasons. One is that we are now in a very multidisciplinary world. Interdisciplinary suggests that we're bringing the disciplines together. Whether we're doing that or not, we're communicating. When we're communicating online, we're communicating to whoever it is that reads it. And they may or may not be from our discipline or from, with the methodology that we are using. So I encourage you, when you're thinking about, even with the scholar to scholar communication, define your terms. Don't assume that the people who are reading what you're writing, understand, what you're talking about. They didn't necessarily, we share a level of common understanding of academic training and research protocols, but that may be very different depending on the part of the world you're in. So as we're reaching a global audience and a multidisciplinary audience, we need to stay away from just kind of writing with the assumption that everyone's going to understand what the heck you're talking about.
Yeah, I think something we were chatting about on Friday last week, Janet, but just I came back to mind here was that one thing that's really surprised me is how many more conversations I've had with scholars I'd not had contact with before since I started writing in a non-scholarly context. So what's been really noticeable to me is academics read my newsletter and share it with their students, and I've heard back from them. I've had contact from supervisors who wanted to hear more about feedback from students on good supervision practices. And I run weekly office hours for students and researchers, which are busier now because of what people have read that I'd written than anything that I had before I ran my Substack, which really surprises me because in a good way, because it means that somehow that is carrying more, this is creating more trust than my job title and the fact I've been in my post for 9 years have. And that was really quite eye-opening for me. I think there's something about consistent presence and sort of steadiness, which is sort of trust over time, isn't it, rather than structural trust.
Right.
Yeah.
So the last point I wanted to make on this on the scholar to scholar communication is that this is not something that should detract from your formal writing and the scholarly articles and et cetera that you might need to complete to compete for the kind of job and position that you want to have. But who's going to read that? If you've been talking about the research experience and talking about what you're doing and, the problems that this research is intended to understand, etc., then when the article comes out, then maybe there's somebody out there who's interested in it besides your mother and your best friend. So, that it's a way of complementing. Also, since I previously worked for a publisher, I can say that one of the things, if you're thinking about writing a book, one of the things that they are going to want to know is, does do you have a readership? Do you have a following? Do you have a presence? And if you don't, if you've just been like I've got to finish this article, I've got to finish this dissertation, and I'm like, I don't have time to do anything else. I'm not going to make time to do anything else. And then, but nobody knows about it outside of, your immediate group. That's not an asset when you go to either, apply for a position or to try to get a publisher. So let's go on to the next example. So then the next kind of target audience that we can try, as we've mentioned, is the practitioners and the policymakers who can put what you've learned into action. So, why might we do this? Well, again, depending on, maybe your career goals are entirely in the academic world, and this isn't something that matters to you immediately. However, you'll know when you go to apply for research funding that they're going to ask, what's the impact of your research? Did you did something that nobody's using. Well, that's not compelling. How is your work being put into practice? So, depending on your field, this may be something that is important to you. It's I think the example that you gave, Eleanor. Let's go on to the next slide. So then the third option, which I also feel is incredibly important, is to communicate with the general audience, the general public, the people who are outside your field. Now, as we've mentioned, if you're communicating with other scholars, you share some basic foundations. If I'm talking to another qualitative methodologist, I don't need to explain like what is grounded theory, like they know what that is, or what is methodology, they know what that is. What's theoretical framework? They know what that is. If I'm communicating with professionals in my field, so my background, my background was in educational leadership and ethics and things like that. And so I actually taught in a school of business, but my my area was around ethics and leadership, if I were communicating with someone in the business field, we would at least have some understanding about the roles of managers, managers versus leaders, and those kinds of things. So we'd have some common foundation, some common training. We've probably read some of the same things. We know some of the big names in that field. But here we're talking about, like, we don't assume that we have any shared foundation. We need to really be able to explain what we did, why was it important, what did we learn, what are we learning as it's underway, why would we do this? Well, there are a variety of reasons. In addition to the thing of, making a difference in the world, getting the information to the people who can use it, but also that, what's our role as scholars in the world? I mean, right now, the online world is full of people who, like, I thought this today and I've got an opinion about it, therefore I am an expert. I have no evidence to support it. I have not even read anything about it, but I've got a following, I'm an influencer, so I'm putting my stuff out there. So for those who want to have something that, to learn something, to make personal and family and professional decisions that are based in, some evidence, about what is truthful or what we know so far about a problem, we hope that they will turn to scholars in the field on that. And I feel that we have a real social responsibility to share what we learned, what we're learning with the public, because we want the public, as taxpayers, whatever country we are in, we want them to support higher education, research, etc. So why are they going to do that if we only talk to each other and we never tell them what we're doing? Or, like, what's the research experience? Why, what's the layers of oversight and review that goes into it? What makes it different than I have an opinion and therefore I'm an expert? So, how might we build that into our, the landscape of the work that we're doing? And how do we need to rethink the way that we write so that we're reaching that general audience? And as we say, we're not expecting that everyone who is in the session or watching this recording, that you're going to do all of these things, but to think, what's important for the work that I want to do? For why did I go into this to begin with? I could have done a different kind of thing than being a scholar. I didn't have to be a scholar. I did it because I care about something. I'm curious about something. How and where, do we share that, to make the kind of difference in the world that drew us to this to begin with. So let's go to the next slide.
Yeah, just on blogs on newsletters before we move on. There's a couple of comments in the chat which I think are really interesting. So one comment is the question. What's the question? That the person had received advice only to start a blog or newsletter if you feel you can update it regularly. Is that true in our experience?
We're going to get to that. So let's hold
later.
that thought. Yes,
okay,
we're going to get to that.
We will
I've got
come back to those then.
Discussion of that. We're not ignoring it. So this, I just was trying to use as an example. So let's just say, as an example, that my research was on virtual teams. Then how might the content and the messaging of what I'm doing change depending on which of these audiences I'm looking for? So, if I'm trying to reach other scholars, I might talk about, gee, I read this really interesting article, this new research has come out that shows, something or other, here's my experience, I was trying to do this research and I ran into these obstacles, but here's how I dealt with it, or what did I learn from this process? How's my research going? All of those kinds of things. So, but then, if I'm trying to reach the practitioners, well, they don't really probably care that much about any of those things. Here, I want to be succinct and give some practical tips. So from what I've learned so far from my readings and my research, here are three things that really make virtual teamwork successful. Here are things that might help, as a manager to keep your team moving forward. Maybe I would provide some case studies and some examples that illustrate the ideas in practice. But then if I were trying to reach a general audience, then, it might be, well, maybe I have the funny, kind of human interest stories about how, the things that have worked or gone wrong, but put into a story format that are going to, teach something, but, through a more, shall we say, lighthearted and human, kind of side. So, if we're doing research, we have the capability of finding, what those kinds of things might be, depending on the audience that we want to reach and the, kind of publication that we're choosing, as a channel. So let's go on and we'll get to that point that you highlighted. Well, I think, we've already kind of talked about this, that this kind of writing can help to improve your competitiveness for positions, fellowships, grants, or publication opportunities. So let's just keep going because we kind of already highlighted this point, I think. Okay, well, I think that I let's just go back to our map with the dots, because some of the points that in response to what your question, I realized that I wrote about it, but I didn't put it in the slides. So we have the option with this kind of writing to think in terms of, say, three kinds of options. One is a solo blog or newsletter. And here's where you get into the question that the person highlighted in the chat. So if Eleanor, hers is her own, she has to define, as she described her process of defining what she was going to write about, and to update that based on the response to the writing. That's what I do with mine. I have my own, so that means like I'm responsible for the whole thing. I've got to pick the technology I'm going to use. I've got to learn the technology that I'm going to use, and I've got to provide, the writing, edit it. I do the illustrations. I do like the whole thing. But then and so it's a big responsibility. One of the friends that we have, Vicki Loris, who has a Substack blog, as an example, as a doctoral student who is teaching at this time, but she has a blog that she does. It's her thing, and she posts to it every week. Well, to me, that signals to someone who is looking at Vicki's work, not only the content of what she's saying, but that here's someone who can manage their time, keep up a cadence of writing, and that says something about her potential for whatever position someone might be considering. But we may say, well, I'm not ready for that. That's just not what I want to do right now. I don't have time to take that responsibility at this point. Okay, option two would be what I would call collaborative. So that's what Eleanor and I are doing with our Reimagine research blog. We write together. We take turns. We'd already chosen that we were going to be in Substack, so we didn't have to make, that decision wasn't on the table. But, this, it may be that, collaborative partners, co-researchers, people working on a project together, or people who share a particular interest. Maybe you say, well, let's do something together. That way, each one of us maybe only has to write, one post a month, or whatever you decide to do. And there are a number of these kinds of blogs and newsletters that you'll find where and this might be an option for you, particularly if you are working on a research project where you have colleagues who might be willing to contribute. And sometimes those are very project based. So, when I'm looking for examples, I'll say, well, the people were writing about a project as it unfolded, the project was completed, and then they just discontinue that channel. The third type is what I would call institutional. So this would be kind of more like a newspaper or a magazine in the print world, where there is an editor, there's an editorial calendar, there's an editorial process. It's not a peer review process necessarily, but there is a review and editorial process. And it's either associated with an academic institution, with a publisher, with a business, like say, a business that is selling, software or some other product that relates to the topic. So here, you have the option of being a contributor without taking on the full responsibility of managing something. So here, this is a topic that we're going to be delving into, in the new year. Where are those kinds of places that might fit where, if you say, well, I would like to reach other scholars, I want people to know me in my discipline beyond because I got to go beyond my home university where I've been, based, and find, other people who are interested in this field. What are the channels that would reach those people? What's their protocol? Can I submit either one or a series of posts or newsletters or blogs or whatever that will reach that audience? So this, I think, is a good way to get started too, because you can look at the kinds of articles and posts that they include and see what's the style, how what are they talking about? I mean, is it first person? Is it more formal? What's the style of doing it, and how do they, what's their readership? So this can, I think, be a step that you can consider as you're moving forward. And even with, say, more independent blogs and newsletters, for example, with mine, in the next newsletter I'm going to be posting, and later this week, I have a guest post, from someone who I had mentioned her book in an earlier newsletter, and I asked her, tell us more about this, because she's writing about interactive documentaries, which I thought, so my next phase beyond Academic Writing Month is we'd be talking about beyond writing. So what are the other ways that we communicate? And so I thought, well, instead of me trying to write about her stuff, ask her to contribute. So if you found on Substack or elsewhere someone's blog or newsletter that's in your area and that's talking about the things that interest you, send them a message. Would you include, if I wrote something, would you include it? I'd like to talk, I'd like to share this. I think your readers would find this interesting. Would you be, willing to share it?
Mm.
Another thing that I do with mine is interviews. So then that's another way that I can bring other voices into my independent solo blog without expecting that person to do, a whole lot of writing and to take that time, but still to bring their voice and their expertise into my writing. So, as you're thinking, well, where and how can I build this into my kind of menu of things that I need to do? There are some options to consider. And when we share the links, we've got, a whole series of posts that dig into this in more depth.
Yeah, and I would just add to that I think there's probably an extent to which, if you ignore all the influencers and all the nonsense that's available, that the content and your target readership itself shapes to a certain extent the frequency that you would be thinking about. So if we just compare three very quickly. So my newsletter is called The Steady, and it's pitched at doctoral students in the long, messy middle. So what I want that to be is like a constant companion through the middle of the doctorate, right? So I have to show up regularly and regularly enough to feel helpful. So I publish weekly. Vicky is right. She's a doctoral student, and she has done, I think it's amazing. She's done something like every Saturday evening for years, without missing one. But it's important to note that she's writing about the experience of being a doctoral researcher. So she's not writing about academic content. She is reflecting in a very thoughtful way on her week and making some connections and comments. It's not very long, and it's very engaging and readable. So an encouragement there to think more widely than your specialist subject knowledge. And then finally, my encryption lawyer friend, she publishes whenever something significant happens. So she's doing fine for readers because they know to come to her for commentary on something specific in that area. So I think that's an additional dimension to bear in mind. And I think it's probably less important that you set the frequency, and more important that whatever you decide, you show up consistently for what you've decided. Yeah.
Right. So we're reaching the top of the hour, but I want to respond to Maria's question here about being scared about starting something, and that's kind of why we started this webinar with the thing of like building your confidence, because that is a challenge in any kind of writing, whether it's an article, a book, or a blog, that I'm putting my stuff out there and people are going to see it. I would say, no, I don't think you should use a pseudonym. I think that you should use your own name and write from your own experience. Now, we're writing on Substack. I also have a WordPress blog. So one of the questions in terms of the starting a small blog and how would I do that? So the choice of kind of the channel and platform does make a difference. Now, when I was previously working for Sage and managing a blog community for Sage, well, that was institutional, right? So when I went to do my own thing, first I thought, well, I will because I'd had a website before. I thought, well, I can do a WordPress blog. But then I'm like, well, here I am out here in the world with my WordPress blog. Like, who knows about it? Like, how am I going to find people to read it? Then I thought, well, I need a newsletter or something, so that that people will know to come find what I've written. Um, Going into a community like Substack, there's also Medium, and there may be others that where there's a community aspect to it already, so it's easier, I think, to find not only readers but other people who share your interests, who can then there's a mechanism for promoting other people's work, etc. So that kind of gives you a little bit easier kind of way of doing it. And that and when you look on someplace like Substack, you see lots of people who are just there are some that, they used to be on CNN or something, and now they've got, a Substack blog. But there's a whole lot of people who are just, writing about their own experiences and kind of starting small and building from there. So, but Maria, please stay in touch. I would, be happy to talk with you if you would like to reach out, and we will have our information in the follow-up. So, since we need to, we're reaching the end of our time here. In our follow-up email, we'll give you the links. It's too hard to follow links from slides, but we do have our Reimagine Research newsletter where we're talking about the kinds of issues we've discussed here today in a sort of loosely career kind of format. How can I reimagine what I do to fit with what I want to do in my life, in my job, and in the impact that I hope I will make in the world, why I chose to go in this direction to begin with. as and our newsletter is free and the archives are open, and we are going to leave it that way because we want to reach everyone who has this interest. However, we are just starting this as a paid subscriber Research Career Builders Club, where we will give more in-depth interactions, answer questions, give you feedback, have a one-on-one consultation or review work, etc. So we hope that you would consider that and support our work. And as we're kind of building our editorial calendar for the next year, we're going to be talking about, the kinds of issues that we've raised here today. What are those, January, I'm going to be looking at, professional societies and associations and different channels you might find valuable to get your work out. And then in February, we're going to look at issues that kind of tie in a little bit to what you were asking, Maria, about using your own name, digital safety, and some of those considerations. And then our individual newsletters, mine, when the field is online, is specifically around qualitative research and in a connected world. So whether you are actually doing the research online or that we're using technology, communications technology in our research. And so Eleanor, why don't you have the last word?
Well, I just wanted to say I'm so loving the chat. I just wish I could type faster because we've been having some really interesting backwards and forwards. And one of the things I know we're both looking forward to most inside the Career Builders Club is the regular office hours that we're going to be holding, which will give members an opportunity to come along and bring their individual questions and thoughts and plans, and we can use that in however works for individual people. So if you have blog ideas you want to talk through, or thinking about CV positioning or finding a voice, it's going to be a really regular space that we offer every month, times that will work for both the UK and sort of this side of the world. And also Janet's based in Colorado, so she's going to handle the other 12 hours of the day people. So I think we've got the whole time zones covered, and it will be a really great opportunity to pick stuff up in more detail. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. It's been lovely to see you. Take care.